Hey everyone, wanted to answer the question of why has it taken a while for Bitcoin to start to set a new all-time high, and why does any asset seem to bounce between all-time highs and lows without usually setting new highs and lows? Okay, so let's start with the most recent, and I'll talk through the more, beyond that. Okay, so yesterday, within the last 24 to 36 hours, Bitcoin hit a price of $71,974, which is 2.5%. Exactly, actually, 2.52% within the highest it's ever been. And then there was a news report that came out on the jobs, and as a result, people thought the Federal Reserve would keep tight monetary policy a little longer, and therefore the price of Bitcoin fell. But even if there had not been a news event, it's generally hard for any asset to set a new all-time high. And so I want to walk through why that is, because I think it's helpful to understand the psychology of the prices of any asset, not just Bitcoin. This would apply to, any asset. So the highest price that Bitcoin has ever been is $73,835.57. So let's round that to $74,000. Okay, so once Bitcoin hit that all-time high in March after a huge run-up, then it pulled back. It pulled back because of, all of the sort of buying momentum had temporarily run out, and there was not enough new buyers to push the price higher, so the price fell back. Okay, so what happens in the psychology of the marketplace every time it approaches that number? Well, since it set that new all-time high in March, every single person who has ever wanted to sell Bitcoin, thought about selling Bitcoin, or knows at some point that they're going to need to sell Bitcoin, whether it is to, buy a new vehicle for their family, buy a house, pay off student loans, any of the myriad of reasons you might need to sell Bitcoin, every single person looks at the price of Bitcoin and tries to figure out when they're going to sell the Bitcoin that they need to sell to meet their family's needs, whatever those are. One second. Okay, so when everybody looks at that price and they know the price is $73,835, everybody thinks, well, if the price ever sets a new record again, if it ever hits $74,000 again, I'll sell the Bitcoin I need. And then they have a second thought. It takes them about 2 seconds to have a second thought, which is, I'll bet a bunch of other people are thinking they're going to sell their Bitcoin when it hits $74,000. So I know what I'll do. Instead of waiting for $74,000, I'll sell it at $73,999. And then they think, wait a second, everyone else probably had that idea too. I better plan to sell my Bitcoin when it hits 73,900, 73,800. Basically, some price that is below the price at which it hit an all-time high. So back in about a month or two back, the price hit 71,980. Well, the highest the price got in the last 36 hours was 71,974. So the same psychology is going on there, is people saying, okay, I'm not going to wait all the way till the price gets to 73,835, the all-time high. I'll just wait till the price hits 71,980, which is the price of the last, month or so ago. And so the price actually only gets within, $26. It gets it within $26 of that price because there's too many people saying, hey, I'm not going to wait for the all-time high. I'll wait for the second highest the price has been this year, where it sort of peaked. And then they say, oh, I'll just sell it for a few dollars less than that. So in both cases, the price got to within about 2.5% of the all-time high before it pulled back, and it pulled back because enough people thought, you know what, at this price, I better go ahead and sell whatever Bitcoin I need to pay for whatever it is I need to buy. So the same thing happens. So that's why, that's what happens on the upside. So if that is the case, then how does any asset set a new all-time high price? And the answer is because the momentum and the buying desire for an asset eventually does overcome that selling pressure. So at some point, after it sort of tests that all-time high, it gets within 5% and then it falls back because there's too many sellers. It gets within 2.5%, which is now done a couple times, and then it falls back. At some point, it pushes close enough to that record that it exhausts all the sellers. Essentially, everybody that was planning to buy planning to sell has sold their Bitcoin. Okay. At which point the price then runs, because at that point, you don't have a bunch of people sitting there thinking, wow, if it gets within $1 or $100 or $1,000 or $5,000 of the all-time high, I'm going to have to sell some Bitcoin. So once the price pushes to a new all-time high, it doesn't mean it doesn't, drop back, because obviously there's people out there saying, hey, if it hits a new all-time high, I got to sell some or whatever. But it's relatively easy once it breaks through then to go on a sort of a pretty strong run, and let's say it gets up into the 80,000s, and then it does the same thing in the 80,000s. It pulls back because there's too many sellers, and then it tests, let's say it hits a high of 84,000. It tests 84,000 and it gets within 5%, and then it falls back, and then it gets within 2.5%, and then it falls back, and then it gets within 2.5% again, and then it falls back. And all of this is purely a function of supply and demand in the marketplace. So the good news is eventually when you test an all-time high enough times, you just run out of sellers. And once you run out of sellers, you sort of break through a wall, and then the price goes a lot higher very quickly. And then it does the same thing, and it can stay doing that same thing for weeks or months before it pushes through that selling pressure, whatever selling pressure there is in the 80,000s. It'll take a while to work through all of the people that could possibly want to sell Bitcoin in the 80,000s. It'll be stuck in the 80,000s until it has exhausted all of those people that could possibly want to part with their Bitcoin in the 80,000s, and then it'll push through the 90,000s. Obviously, the reverse can happen as well. So when the price is going down, the same thing happens. It hits a low level, and then it bounces back, and it bounces back, and it bounces back. Well, if there's enough selling pressure, just enough people due to, for example, in 2022, the FTX bankruptcy and a bunch of crypto companies going out of business due to stupid business practices that had nothing to do with Bitcoin, and all of that, the price can get driven down and down and down. Well, the lowest the price ever got in 2022 was 15,504. 15,504. So 15,504 was 77.5% below the highest, the highest it had ever been prior to that point. So you could see the price was between 16 and 17,000, and every time it got below 16,000, it would just bounce back up. Not like magic, but it was just like there were clearly a lot of demand down there by people like me, who every time it was getting cheaper, I was buying more. So if you look at the historical drawdowns of Bitcoin, it's interesting because Bitcoin does the same thing. People look at the historical patterns and they say, okay, back in 2011, the biggest drawdown in the price was 93.7%, which is huge. That's a huge drawdown. It went from $32 down to $2. All right, so the biggest drawdown in 2014, 3 years later, was 92.6%. Well, the question is, if previously it had dropped 93.7%, why didn't it drop 93.7% again? Because the same psychology is in play. People saying, wait a second, I'll bet a lot of people are waiting for it to drop to 93.7%, or let's call it 94%. So I'm not going to be dumb enough to wait for 93.7%. I'll wait for 93%, or I'll wait for 92%, or it turns out 92.6. So the biggest drawdown was 93.7%. The second biggest was 93.6%. Well, if you fast forward to after 2017, the biggest drawdown was 84%. Again, from 94% to 92% to 84%. Okay, so then let's fast forward to 2022. In 2022, the price was coming down, and people on Twitter, crypto Twitter, Bitcoin Twitter, whatever you want to call it, Bitcoin X, Twitter X, whatever. Everybody was speculating, which I thought was just absolutely hilarious. They were all speculating that the price drawdown in 2022 was going to be 80%. So people were all over Twitter talking about how much Bitcoin they were going to buy at 13,800. That was the magic number. It was all over Twitter, 13,800. Everybody bragging how much dry powder they had, ready to buy just vast quantities of Bitcoin at $13,800. Because they all thought if the drawdown after 2017 was 84%, surely it would be at least 80% in 2022. Now, there's people like me that think that thought process is dumb, because there's no way you can predict what the drawdown is going to be. And by assuming it's going to be 80%, it means you don't buy any Bitcoin for any price cheaper or any price other than your sort of one low price of 13,800. So for me personally, I was loading up on Bitcoin in the 40,000s, in the 30,000s, in the 20,000s, and in the teens. And when it got lower, between 16 and 17,000, I was buying a bunch of Bitcoin. $17,000 per Bitcoin was 75% below the 2021 all-time high. And again, I'm sitting here on Twitter saying, okay, morons, why would you not buy something at a 75% discount because you're bragging that you're going to get it at an 80% discount? What if you never get it at an 80% discount? Who are you to say that because the price went down 84% after 2017, that it's going to go down 80% after 2021? You don't know. Nobody knows. So anyway, so as it went down, I was loading up knowing that I am not smart enough to know what the bottom's going to be. Nobody else is smart enough to know where the bottom's going to be. So if something's on sale, if you go by a yard sale and you see something you want to buy and it's 50% off, you don't sit there saying, I'm going to buy it when it's 60% off, because there's a good chance somebody like me is going to come along and say, hey, 50% off, I'll take it. And suddenly you're standing there with nothing because you wanted 55% off and it was only 50% off. So people like me were loading up on a bunch of Bitcoin between $16,000 and $17,000 per coin because we had no idea what the bottom was. And frankly, I was loading up on Bitcoin at between $20,000 and $25,000 a coin too, because I didn't know it was going to go lower than that. And so anyway, there's a ton of people sitting on a bunch of US dollar cash waiting for $13,800 Bitcoin that will never come, because people like me, every time the price tried to push toward an 80% drawdown, there were people like me saying, hey, I don't know how low it's going to go, but 75% off sounds like a great deal. So anyway, so the same thing happens again on the high end. When you don't know where the upper limit is, people sell when it tries to test, especially when it's testing all-time highs. So on the upper end, it's hard to push past a previous all-time high, which that price right now is 73,835. When it does push back that price, it tends to run strongly for a little while. And then on the downside, there's not really a price, because the prices are all, percentages on the downside. On the downside, it's all percentages, and people are looking at, hey, 2011, 93.7% drawdown. 2014, or I should say after 2013, 92.6% drawdown. After 2017, 84% drawdown. After 2021, 77.5% drawdown. Anyway, with the Bitcoin ETFs, I'd be shocked if Bitcoin ever, I think it'll run to, 150,000, 200,000 a coin. And then, the price might come down by 50%. But if it comes down by 50% off $200,000, that's still $100,000, which is still substantially higher than the price today. But I would be surprised if we get a price drawdown bigger than 50% now. And I don't think we get a price drawdown anywhere close to that until the price has run way above where it is today, meaning I think even with a 50% price drawdown, we're still at a price significantly above where the price is today. So anyway, as a result of the psychology of people selling when an asset gets near its all-time high, and buying when the percentage is near the historical sort of price percent drawdowns, what that means is virtually all assets spend the vast majority of their time between lows and highs. So very rarely is a stock like Apple or Amazon or Tesla or, Netflix or, any of those, very rarely are any of those setting a new all-time high. They're typically doing a big run up, and then they're spending weeks, months, or even years below that all-time high. And every time they get close to that all-time high, they pull back, and then they test it again, and they pull back. And the same is true. If an asset is, people know historically that that asset typically does not go down. For example, the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ, typically does not correct by more than 33%, for example. Then you see the same thing. The closer it gets to 33%, the more it bounces off it. Doesn't mean it can't set a new all-time high or it can't set a new, record percentage drop. It's just less likely, because the lower it gets to those numbers, the more people buy. So anyway, same is true for Bitcoin. So I still think within the next month or two, we're likely to see new all-time highs. I think as soon as we do, it'll push into the 80,000s or 90,000s very quickly. And then it'll probably feel, once Bitcoin's in the 80,000s or 90,000s, we'll probably spend a month or two feeling just like the last month or two, where it feels like, wow, we keep not quite getting to the all-time high. We get within 5% or 4% or 2.5%. And then it falls back and, trades below that for a couple weeks. And then it gets within 5% or 4% or 2.5% again. So that price action will continue until it reaches the highest it can reasonably go this price cycle, which again, nobody knows. Maybe it's 120,000, maybe it's 150,000, maybe it's 250,000 a coin. And then it'll fall back, probably more substantially, like 50% or something like that. And then it'll, do its thing all over again. So anyway, to recap, I'll try to recap this. I know there's a lot of moving parts. To recap, when any asset, not just Bitcoin, but when any asset gets close to its all-time high, there's a lot of selling pressure because people are saying, wow, it's the highest it's ever been, or it's close to the highest it's ever been. And if you ever need to sell anything, the inclination of humans, if you have to sell something because you need cash to buy something else, is to sell it when it's near its all-time high, because you don't know if it's going to go higher, but you know that it's a great price if it's the highest it's ever been. So I guess point number one from all of this is humans tend to want to sell stuff when it gets close to the highest it's ever been, and they tend to not risk it getting all the way there, so they'll sell it 2.5% or 4% or 5% or 10% below that number. Point number two, the same happens on the reverse. When something gets close to an 84% drawdown or a 75% drawdown or a 33% drawdown, when things get close to the percentage drop that they've ever had before, there tends to be buying pressure. So it tends to keep the asset from going lower, because there's people like me out there saying, hey, if the lowest it ever got before 2021 was an 84% drawdown, I'm not going to risk it going down 84% again or even 80% again. 50%, 60%, 75%, that's a big enough discount for me. I will load up on as much as I can get. And then the third principle of all of this is that all assets behave that way. It's not just, it's not just Bitcoin. It's, essentially the vast majority of assets behave that way. And the fourth principle is that once you break through an all-time high, you tend to get what's called price discovery, which is nobody knows what the new all-time high is going to be that it's going to chill at for the next few months. And so sometimes you can get a $5,000 or $10,000 per coin run as everybody's trying to figure out how high can it go before it pulls back. And that can happen typically over a relatively short period. In fact, I saw on Twitter one time, somebody said 85% of all of Bitcoin's price gains happen in just 13 days out of every year. So I don't know if that is accurate. It sounds accurate, just from my own experience with Bitcoin since 2017. But it's safe to assume, 85% of all the price gains happen in 13 days out of the year. And you don't want to miss any of those 13 days, and nobody can predict when they are. So anyway, that's why it's best to own as much Bitcoin as you can and hold on to it as long as possible. The fifth principle out of all of this, after principle number 4, which is once you get a breakout, it tends to run, it tends to set a new all-time high quite quickly, is that virtually all assets, not just Bitcoin, but that includes Amazon, Tesla, Apple, whatever, including gold, assets like gold. The vast majority of assets spend the vast majority of the time, I mean more than 80%, probably more than 90%, probably more than, depending on the asset, probably more than even 95 or 98% of all days are days that the asset is not setting a new all-time high. So if you're holding an asset and you think it's only exciting when it's setting new all-time highs, almost no asset is setting new all-time highs more than maybe 1, 2, or 5% of the time, which means 95 to 99% of the time, you're going to check the price of an asset, and it's going to be a day that there will not be a record price that day. For all the reasons I've just explained, it'll be below that, it'll be above it, but it's not going to be setting a new all-time low. It's not going to be setting a new all-time high the vast majority of days, which means most investing is just buying and holding. You're buying and holding, and it's all good. So, for example, my family just went to Thailand to visit some friends from college, and we spent 2 weeks in Thailand, and we bought everything with my Coinbase debit card. So we bought everything with Bitcoin, and the whole time we were in Thailand, the price was, in the ballpark of $67,000 to $70,000 a coin. Well, obviously that's a few $1,000s below the all-time high, but it doesn't matter. It's substantially above the price I paid for it. So it's not like I'm using my Coinbase debit card when it's setting new all-time highs, because then I would never be buying anything with Bitcoin. So I've loaded up on enough Bitcoin that as long as it's meaningfully above the price I paid for it, I'm not worried about whether I'm spending it at $74,000 a coin or $67,000 a coin if I'm spending Bitcoin that I bought for $42,000 a coin or $26,000 a coin. So anyway, the vast majority of assets will not be setting a new all-time high on a dollar basis and will not be testing new lows on a percentage basis in any given day, which means investing is normally boring. It is a process of waiting, which is why people say time in the market beats time in the market. That means it's better to have Bitcoin and hold it for 3 to 5 years than it is to try to pick the perfect 3 to 5 days out of the year to buy more or to sell or whatever. It's just no human can time the market. Nobody can do it. And that means you can't do it either. And that means the best you can do is buy as much Bitcoin as you can, sit on it as long as possible. And if you have a substantial amount of Bitcoin that you can spend, you convert your spending into Bitcoin before you spend it, like I do, then and obviously my income streams all are auto converted into Bitcoin every time they hit my bank account. So I'm constantly getting, replenished new Bitcoin in addition to spending Bitcoin. But it means the balances I hold are held in Bitcoin rather than US dollars, which is obviously beneficial. So anyway, as always, hope this helps. Hope it helps you understand the psychology of why assets move the way they do. Why typically an asset is not setting a new all-time high every day, even if it's one of the best performing stocks or bonds or commodities or digital currencies that's ever existed. Even so, it's typically not setting a new all-time high on any given day. And again, remember that once you break through all-time highs, price discovery happens very quickly. The upsides happen very quickly. And what matters is how much Bitcoin you own when it goes to 80 or 90,000 or $100,000 per coin, and then it chills there for a few months. The question is, well, how much Bitcoin did you have before that happened? Because that's the what matters. So right now, I'll check my watch. Bitcoin is at $69,396. I consider that a great price to buy more Bitcoin. So if you're wondering, is now a good time to buy Bitcoin? Yeah, it's actually on sale as compared to $72,000, which is the price it's been a few days ago. So if you're looking for a good time to buy Bitcoin, at some point, it will be the last time you could ever buy Bitcoin in the 60,000s. And I don't know if that's today or if that's next month or whatever, but right now you can buy Bitcoin for less than $70,000 per coin, which to me sounds like a bargain. And, I don't think you'll regret it. So anyway, as always, hope this helps. I'm here for anything anyone needs. If you have any questions, hit me up on Facebook Messenger. You can also text me at 601-207-0813. That number again, 601-207-0813. Happy to answer questions by text message or by Facebook Messenger or posted in response to this video or anything else. And always here to help for anything I can on your Bitcoin journey. Good luck.